March 8, 1970. Lions drag strip, Long Beach, California. Don Garlits was sitting in the seat of his dragster when the transmission exploded. The car split in half, right there on the starting line. The front half with Garlits still in it slid down the track. The rear half stayed behind on fire. When the car finally stopped, Don Garlits looked down. His right foot was gone. Part of it was still inside the car. The rest of it was somewhere back on the starting line. He was 38 years old. He had been the most dangerous man at any drag strip in America for 15 years. And the newspaper that covered his accident ran one sentence at the very end of the story that must have felt like a door slamming shut. It said, "It is not known if he will ever race again. He would race again." But what he built next, lying in that hospital bed, with one foot missing and the crash playing over and over in his head, that is the story nobody tells the way it deserves to be told. Because what Don Garlits drew on paper in that hospital room in Long Beach changed drag racing forever. And the people running the sport tried to stop it before it ever ran a single lap. To understand what Garlits built in that hospital bed, you first need to understand what he was building against. For 15 years, Top Fuel had one design, one look, one layout. It was called the Slingshot Dragster. Engine out front, driver behind the rear axle. The entire car stretched out long and low, with the driver sitting way in the back while the engine and all that fire and fuel and mechanical fury sat just a few feet ahead of him. Mickey Thompson had made the Slingshot the standard design back in 1954. And it worked. It was fast. It was consistent. And by the time the 1960s came around, every serious Top Fuel team in America was running some version of it. But it had one problem that everyone in the sport knew about and nobody had fixed. In a Slingshot, the driver sat directly behind the engine. His legs actually straddled the drivetrain. The transmission sat right between his knees. The clutch, the bell housing, the blower, the entire mechanical heart of the car, all of it sat within arm's reach of the man trying to drive it down the track. When the car worked right, it was beautiful. When something went wrong at 200 miles per hour, and in Top Fuel in the 1960s, things went wrong regularly. The driver was surrounded by everything that was failing. Garlits had 6 friends die in Slingshot dragsters in the 2 years before his own accident. 6 funerals. 6 men he knew by name. 6 families left behind. And then at Lions on March 8, 1970, the same design took his own foot. He described what happened later in his own words. He said, "The transmission exploded in my dragster on the final run, and it cut my foot off and cut the car in 2. That's when I drew up plans for what I thought would be a championship rear-engine car. I would go out to the shop in Cessna on my wheelchair, saw stuff out on the band saw, and make the parts. On a wheelchair, with one foot, going out to the shop to cut metal and build a car." That is the kind of man Don Garlits was. He was born January 14, 1932, in Tampa, Florida. His father was an engineer at Westinghouse. His mother was 16 years old when they married. They were working people, modest people. The kind of family where you fix things yourself because you could not afford to pay someone else to fix them. Don was pulling engines out of cars by the time he was 14 years old. He graduated high school in 1948. His grades were good enough to get him an office job doing bookkeeping. He lasted 6 months before he walked out and never went back. Cars were what he understood. Cars were what he was going to do. He built his first real drag car in 1954, under an oak tree in North Tampa. He used an arc welder and a cutting torch to modify a 1927 Ford Model T Roadster. Put in a 1948 Mercury engine block, a 1939 Ford Flaw shift transmission, and a 1948 Ford rear axle. That car ran 13.5 seconds at 93 miles per hour. It was a start. A year later, he won his first NHRA-sanctioned race at Lake City Airport in Florida, running 12.1 seconds at 108 miles per hour. After that first win in 1955, Wally Parks, the founder of NHRA and one of the most powerful men in American motorsport, looked at this young kid from Tampa and told him flat out, "You will never beat the Californians." Those words proved to be the most incorrect prediction in the history of drag racing, because for the next 15 years, Don Garlits beat the Californians consistently, repeatedly, in cars he built himself in a shop in Cessna, Florida, with his own hands and his own ideas and a willingness to try things that nobody else had been willing to try. By 1964, he was the first drag racer to officially break 200 miles per hour from a standing start. By 1968, he was the first to run 240 miles per hour. He won the U.S. Nationals at Indianapolis in 1964. He won Bakersfield in 1965. He went to England in 1964 for the first International Drag Festival and showed the rest of the world what American top fuel looked like up close. And he earned a nickname that stuck for the rest of his life, Big Daddy, given to him by a track announcer in 1962. And it fit, because on a drag strip there was nobody bigger. Until March 8, 1970, when the transmission exploded and took his foot with it. And then he went to the hospital, and he started drawing on paper. And he built the car that NHRA did not want at their races. But here is the part of this story that nobody talks about. When Don Garlits showed up at his first race with that new car, the reaction from the drag racing world was not admiration. It was not curiosity. It was not even polite skepticism. Other drivers refused to stage next to him. The man who ran Lions' drag strip warned him that if the car crossed a single lane line, it was going straight back in the trailer. This was not a car that drag racing welcomed. This was a car that drag racing tried to send home. The idea behind what Garlits built was simple. If the front-engine Slingshot kept killing and injuring drivers because of what happened when mechanical things failed between the driver's legs, then move the mechanical things. Put the engine behind the driver. Put the driver out front. Put the man in clean air, away from the fire and the exploding parts, with a clear view of the track in front of him. Simple idea, but nobody had made it work. Rear-engine cars had been tried before. Different builders had experimented with putting the engine behind the driver going back to the late 1950s. A car called the STP drag wedge had run in 1969. A car built by a man named Bernie Shacker had tried it in 1970. A Woody Gilmore car had tried it and crashed hard at Lions in December of 1969, which is why Lions manager C.J. Hart was not excited to see another one pull into his track a year later. None of them had worked. They all had the same problem. They wandered. They were hard to steer. At high speed, they drifted toward the center line or the guardrail, and the driver had to fight the car the entire length of the track. A car that wanders at 200 miles per hour does not just lose a race. It kills people. Garlits understood why they wandered. He had studied every previous rear-engine attempt, and he believed he knew the fix, the steering ratio. In a rear-engine car, the weight distribution was completely different from a Slingshot. The car responded differently to steering inputs. The steering had to be slower, about 20% slower, or the car would overcorrect and come offline. He spent 3 months testing before he ever showed the car to another competitor. Private runs at Tampa Dragway, just him and his crew, adjusting the steering, adjusting the balance, running until the car went straight and stayed straight. There were moments during those tests when the car left the track completely, veered off sharply into the Florida grass. If there had been a guardrail at Tampa Dragway in those early sessions, the story would have ended before it started. But there was no guardrail, and Garlits kept going back out. He built the car with 2 men he trusted. Connie Swingle, who had worked with Garlits for years, and Tommy T.C. Lemons, who was there for almost every swamp rat that ever carried that name down a quarter mile. The car had a 217-inch wheelbase. The engine, a 426 Chrysler Hemi, the same engine Garlits had been running for years, sat behind the driver. The driver sat out in front, in the nose of the car, looking down the track with nothing between him and the finish line but open air. Garlits did his first serious test run on December 27, 1970, at Sunshine Speedway in St. Petersburg, Florida. He ran 7.01 seconds at 211 miles per hour on the first pass. The car went right down the track. Straight, clean, no tire smoke. He ran again. 6.85 at 214 miles per hour. He and his crew drove home from St. Petersburg that night, and if you had been in the car with them, Garlits said later, you would have thought they were drunk. They were not drunk. They had just proved that the car worked. Now they had to prove it to the rest of the world. He built a backup plan just in case, a traditional Slingshot, Swamp Rat 15. The last front-engine car he would ever build. He brought it along to California inside the same trailer as the new rear-engine car, just in case the whole thing turned out to be a mistake. His wife Pat found out about the Slingshot. Pat Garlits had watched her husband nearly die twice. She had watched 6 of his friends get killed. She had sat with him in hospitals. She had raised their daughters through all of it. And when she walked into the shop and saw a new front-engine car under construction, she made one thing clear. She told him to get back on the rear-engine project, that he owed it to his friends who had passed away in Slingshots. Garlits sold the Slingshot to Goodyear to use as a display car. He never drove another front-engine dragster in competition, not once. He arrived at Lyons drag strip in early January 1971, the same track where his foot had been taken 10 months earlier. The car looked like nothing else in the field, long, black, the engine sitting behind the cockpit instead of in front of it. The driver Garlits himself sitting way out in the nose of the car, exposed, watching where he was going. Nobody wanted to stage next to him. The other drivers had seen rear-engine cars go wrong before. They had no reason to believe this one was different. From where they stood, a man who had just lost part of his foot at this exact track had come back with an experimental car that had never proven itself in real competition. They declined to line up alongside it. C.J. Hart, the man who ran Lyons, warned Garlits personally. If the car crossed a lane line, it was going back in the trailer. Hart had watched Pat Foster's car tumble in December 1969. He was not prepared to watch it happen again. Garlits ran 6.60 at Lyons, just 0.05 off the track record. The car went straight. He finished runner-up. He came back a week later at Orange County International Raceway and ran runner-up again. The scoffers got a little quieter. Then came February 1971, the NHRA Winternationals, Pomona, California. 32 cars in the top fuel field, the tightest qualifying sheet anyone could remember. Garlits qualified 9th. He was not the fastest car in the field. He was not the favorite. He was the man that nobody wanted to race against. And he came in 9th place and went to work. Round 1, he beat Tommy Allen, 6.85. Round 2, he ran 6.72. Knocked out John Nichols. Round 3, he ran 6.72 again. Beat Carl Olson, a California driver, in front of a California crowd that had been telling the man from Tampa he did not belong on their track since 1955, semi-final. He ran 6 minutes 70 seconds, beat Jim Dunn. In the final round, his opponent Kenny Safford could not make the call. A clutch problem between rounds kept him off the line. Garlits made a solo pass, ran 7:03 just to close it out. Don Garlits won the 1971 NHRA Winternationals. In the very first national event appearance of the rear-engine Swamp Rat 14. He drove from Pomona back east and won the IHRA Winternationals. Then he drove back west to win the Bakersfield March meet. 3 major wins, in the same car that other drivers refused to stage next to, built by a man on a wheelchair in a shop in Sefner, Florida. After those 3 wins, there was not much left for the doubters to say, except one thing: how soon can I get one? And here is where the story gets bigger than one man and one car. Because winning the Winternationals was one thing. What happened over the next 18 months tells you something true about how the world actually works. Not just in drag racing, in everything. The same people who refused to stage next to that car in January 1971 were building their own versions of it before the year was finished. And the car that Lyons drag strip had threatened to send back to the trailer, the car made every other design in top fuel drag racing extinct in less than 2 years. After the Winternationals win, Garlits went back to work on the car. He added a rear wing. He had not run a rear wing since a very early Swamp Rat back in 1963. But with the engine now sitting behind the driver and the weight distribution changed, the rear wing made sense. It planted the back of the car, kept it stable through the traps. That combination front wing and rear wing on a rear-engine car became the standard design for every top-fuel dragster built after 1971. Not just Garlits' cars, every car. Don Prudhomme was one of the most famous and most talented drivers in all of drag racing. He had his doubts about the rear-engine idea. He and a man named John Butterer built their own car, a wedge-shaped aerodynamic. Design called the Hot Wheels Dragster to try a different approach to the same problem. It did not work. The car was too heavy. The aerodynamic advantage disappeared under the weight penalty. Not long after that, Prudhomme built a rear-engine car based on the same concept Garlits had proven at the Winternationals. The man who doubted it ended up building one. That is how you know when something is right. Not when everyone agrees with it on day one, but when the people who disagreed with it on day one end up doing it themselves. Through the 1971 season, rear-engine cars won 3 of the 8 NHRA national events. Garlits won at Pomona and Dallas. Arnie Bailing won at the Summer Nationals in Englishtown in Bruce Dodd's rear-engine car. The Slingshot still won 5 events that year. On paper, the old design still had the edge in wins, but anybody who watched that season closely knew what was coming. The gap was closing every race. Then 1972 arrived. In 1972, Art Marshall won one NHRA national event in a Slingshot Dragster. 1. Every other top fuel win that year went to rear-engine cars. Carl Olson, Gary Beck, Jim Walther, Don Moody, Chip Woodall, Jeb Allen, and Garlits himself. The Slingshot Dragster had been the default design in top fuel since 1954. 17 years of development. 17 years of smart, experienced, dedicated people pushing it to its limits. The best drivers in the country had been running Slingshots their entire careers. Swamp Rat 14 made all of it obsolete in less than 2 years. Not because NHRA told anyone to stop building Slingshots. There was no rule change, no memo, no announcement. The Slingshot did not get banned. It just disappeared. Because the rear-engine car was better. And once something is proven better on a drag strip, where every 100th of a second is visible on a scoreboard in front of thousands of people, the old way cannot survive. Now let me tell you something about Garlits that tells you exactly who this man was. At the 1971 Spring Nationals in Dallas, Garlits had put Swamp Rat 14 in a solid qualifying position. He and his crew were satisfied with where they stood. They loaded the car back in the trailer, started to get ready to leave for the evening. Then the loudspeaker announced something. A competitor named John Weeb had just made another qualifying run. He had run a 6:48. He had stolen the #1 qualifying position from Garlits. What did Don Garlits do? He drove back into the track. He unloaded the car. With qualifying time almost gone, he ran 6:44. He took the #1 spot back after he had already packed up and started to leave. That is not the behavior of a man who was happy to be competing. That is the behavior of a man who decided somewhere between the hospital and the shop in Sefner that he was going to win everything that was winnable for as long as he could do it, and that nobody was going to sneak past him while he was watching. He won the Spring Nationals that weekend. By the end of the 1971 season, Garlits had run 6.21 at the U.S. Nationals, the quickest elapsed time in the history of top fuel to that point. He had reached 244 miles per hour with Swamp Rat 14. He was named Top Fuel Driver of the Year by Carcraft magazine. He was named Man of the Year by Drag News. The car that nobody wanted to stage next to had set every record in the class. He sold Swamp Rat 14 to a man named Carl Casper as a show car with one condition attached. It was never to be raced again. He later traded Casper a brand new car in 1983 to get Swamp Rat 14 back. That tells you what the car meant to him. In 1987, a curator from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington came to see Garlits in Florida. He pointed to Swamp Rat 30, the car that had taken Garlits to his 3rd NHRA championship. In 1986, and he told Garlits those 4 words that not many men in any sport ever hear. He said, "This is a national treasure." Garlits gave Swamp Rat 30 to the Smithsonian. It went on display at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., where it stayed for 15 years. The man who Wally Parks told in 1955 would never beat the Californians had a car in the Smithsonian. Don Garlits won 144 sanctioned national events in his career. He won championships in the NHRA, the AHRA, and the IHRA. He was the first man to officially break 170, 180, 200, 240, 250, 260, and 270 miles per hour from a standing start. He was voted the greatest drag racer of all time for NHRA's 50th anniversary in 2000. And NHRA, the same organization whose track manager threatened to send his car back to the trailer in January 1971, later ranked the Swamp Rat 14 Winternationals win as the third greatest moment in 75 years of their sport's history. Third greatest moment. Out of everything that has happened in drag racing for 3/4 of a century. That car that nobody would stage next to number 3 on the all-time list. But the number that matters most to me is not a win total or a speed record. The number that matters is 2 years. 2 years from the debut of Swamp Rat 14 to the last time a Slingshot Dragster ever won an NHRA national event. 17 years of Slingshot development. Gone in 2 years, because one man on a wheelchair in a shop in Florida decided that the way things had always been done was not good enough anymore. Think about the men who refused to stage next to him at Lions in January 1971. Think about C.J. Hart warning him about lane lines. Think about the drivers who built wedge cars and aero cars and every other alternative to what Garlits had built. All of them ended up in rear-engine cars. All of them. Because what Garlits built in that hospital room was right. And once something is right, nothing that is wrong can outlast it for very long. There is a straight, unbroken line from Swamp Rat 14 to every top fuel car sitting in every trailer at every NHRA national event held in America right now. The engine behind the driver. The driver out front in clean air. Both wings, front and back, the whole design. All of it traces back to a man lying in a hospital bed in Long Beach, California in March 1970, with his right foot gone and a transmission explosion playing on repeat in his mind, picking up a pencil and starting to draw. Wally Parks told him in 1955 he would never beat the Californians. The Californians have been racing in Don Garlits' car ever since 1971. I want to leave you with one last thing. When Garlits talked about the accident years later, about losing his foot, about coming back, about the rear-engine car, someone asked him how he could possibly climb back into one of those machines after what had happened. He said it simply. He said, "I don't have a transmission in this car anymore, and that's what hurt me." That is the mind of an engineer. That is the mind of a man who looked at a catastrophic accident and saw not a reason to stop, but a specific problem with a specific fix. The transmission was in the wrong place, so he moved it. And in moving it, he saved the lives of every top fuel driver who has climbed into a rear-engine car since 1971. Because the design that Garlits proved at the 1971 Winternationals moved the driver away from the explosion zone. Not all the way. Drag racing was never going to be completely safe, but far enough. The front-engine Slingshot was killing people at a rate that the sport could not keep absorbing. Don Garlits fixed it. The establishment did not ask him to fix it. Nobody hired him to solve the problem. Nobody told him the answer was a rear-engine car. He figured it out himself, in a hospital bed, with one foot, on a wheelchair, in a shop in Sefner, Florida. They tried to send that car home before it ever raced. He saved their lives anyway. If this story meant something to you today, if it reminded you of why these men and these machines deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button. It is right there. And hit the like button. That is how other people who love this history find their way here. These are American stories. The men who lived them deserve to be remembered. I will see you on the next one.